Well, today we are very blessed to have a guest speaker. Mark Vogel is here, and he is a military graduate of the Citadel. His last assignment was Associate Professor of Military Science at Fordham University. Now, Mark is not used to speaking to church audiences, but to classrooms of students. So today, we all get to be students. That way Mark will feel right at home. So we're all here to learn something today. For several years, Mark has researched the topic, how did God use Christianity to create the United States of America? That is a great question, and there are some fascinating answers to that question. So Mark, if you'll come at this time and talk to us.
Good morning. First, I need to thank Pastor Tim for inviting me to speak to y'all today. This talk, How Did God Use Christianity to Create the United States, was something that I believe God directed me to for over 5 years. My life had been really busy working on something completely different in the history realm, and I was actually pushed out of that realm and left with a vacancy, a void, and he filled it with this. And so, almost like a job, almost like going to work every day, 5 days a week, I was researching this question. And it's an amazing thing. It's just like the first time when you read the Bible and you start realizing the magnificence of God. The same thing happened with me with this. It is an unbelievable history. I can only be a billboard for you today. You're driving down the road of life and you get to see me for about 3 seconds, and hopefully I catch your attention to the idea that God actually had something to do with the creation of this nation, and it's more than that. It's actually He directed it. And then I hope I'm a match. I hope I light a flame of curiosity in you. And I hope that you actually, after today, start trying to find out, why are they saying what they're saying? Why are they saying separation of church and state? What does that mean? Where did that come from? Why are they saying no God in school? Why are they saying no? You know, when I was a child, and some of us in this room are my age, we actually did pray in public school first thing in the morning. We actually did do that. We don't do it anymore, but we did do it. Yeah, and the first textbook, do you know what the first textbook, this is way before the founders. You're talking about 200 years before the founders. They wanted to teach with the Bible. They wanted to teach people how to read with the Bible. And that went all the way up through the founders. You actually had Supreme Court justices, early Supreme Court justices, that said the law is based on the Bible. If it contradicts the Bible, it is not a law. That was Supreme Court justices. See where we're at? You see, and so today what we're going to talk about really is that. Now the other person I have to thank, I got to thank Tim and Amy. They are the bridge from East Texas that brought us here, that introduced me to Pastor Tim and got us here, and I really appreciate that. And then I have to thank you all as Baptists. I'm a Catholic, but I am a saved Catholic, but it's a real thing. When I was 12 years old, I was with my Nana, who was my grandmother, and she was from Charlotte, North Carolina, and we were watching another North Carolinian on television, Billy Graham. Billy Graham was at a stadium, and he was speaking, and it was me and my grandmother, and when he gave his talk, and then he did his call, and I told my grandmother I would go up. So I count that as the day that I was saved. Now, I couldn't go, obviously, because he was on the television, but I can tell you, years later, like 50 years later, his son, Franklin Graham, came to Longview, Texas. My wife and I did go to that revival, and I did go up. I told my wife I didn't get to go when I was a kid, but I'm going now. And so I believe in the term saved. And you know what? For the Baptists who have never been in a Catholic church, that is not a verboten word in the Catholic Church. It is used by priests. We know what the term saved means. The problem for us is we're catching on a little late, but that's all right because you guys got there and we're following up. The other person I have to thank, as I said, was Billy Graham for being saved. Now, my eyes are terrible, so I can't read to you Billy Graham's statement that is up there right now. So I need to ask your forgiveness and ask you to read that statement, and I'll give you a couple seconds. If you notice, the key thing, at least to me, the key thing in that statement and the observation that he makes about us dividing our lives up into pieces, and there's a piece for the church, and there's a piece for work, and there's a piece for family or whatever. I'm not looking at it, so I can't see it, but you know how people divide up their life. That is probably the essence of what is wrong with the United States of America today. Is there a part of your life that God isn't supposed to be in? No, right? He's supposed to be everywhere. And Billy Graham hit it right on the head, right on the nail on the head of breaking our life up. Now, what today's talk is about is how did God use Christianity to create the United States really goes to the essence of that. Because God is involved in every aspect of the creation, and he's involved in the people, in the actual people. He didn't magically do this stuff, but he did use people like you and me, regular folks, to go out and create a nation that we had. And I'm going to use the past tense, we had, because we're losing it. And if we don't do something real quick, it'll be gone, if it isn't already gone. And so today, we need to, but here's the problem. We've grown up thinking that we're not allowed to mix religion and faith and politics. We're not allowed to do that. You know, one part's over here and one part's over there. Well, guys, that's not what the original people who came to this nation as immigrants thought. It is not what the founders thought. It is not the way the Constitution was built. Faith drives politics, not the opposite and not separate. Now, sometimes people who don't like me or my view will say separation of church and state, or you want to be a theocracy. No. A theocracy is when a church, a specific church, Baptists, Catholics, Episcopalians, a specific church becomes a ruler of the country. That is not what I'm for, and it's not what anybody who speaks as I do is for. What we are for is God's in us. We use God to vote, to think, to buy, every action. That's the God we're thinking about, and that's how God gets involved in politics. If God drove your vote, there are people you just couldn't vote for. Now, at times, the problem is I'm speaking to an audience that probably 80 or 90% already know all this stuff. But it's our job, and hopefully at the end of this you'll believe me, as a citizen of the United States, to be an evangelist within the United States. When we talk about how God used Christianity to create the United States, we have to look at, first of all, what is history and what is providence. You have to understand those to understand the rest of it. So let me take a shot at history. Now, with history, we're given a guide by God, and that's in Psalms chapter 78, verses 1 to 11. And what it says in those 11 verses, I'm not going to read them, but what it says in those 11 verses basically is God's telling us you have to study history, you have to teach your children history, and you have to teach them why they have to learn history. Now, my little daughter Julie put me on the spot when I was like 10 or 11 years, when she was 10 or 11 years old. She said, "Dad, why are we learning history?" And I gave her all the regular talk. We learn history so we don't make the same mistake. We have to learn history so we know where we came from and all of that. Well, that's BS. We learn history because of what it says in Psalms chapter 78, 1 through 11. God says you learn history to see me. You learn history to see the magnificence of God. You learn history to see what God did. That's why you learn history. I didn't know that. But I think this was part of God kicking me in the butt and teaching me as I went along. And so that's one part. Now let's talk about providence a minute. There are many verses, and I'm sure Pastor Tim can throw them out to you for a week, about providence. But the key to providence is that we believe that God has a plan. We are living that plan. And you really, in the end, you're not going to be able to get away from it. You're going to, if I was reading the Baptist, I forget, it was a Baptist training manual, and it was extremely specific. And it was Baptist, and it said everything that happens, God designed, and everything will happen in God's design by God. And so we have to accept that. Now, when you do accept it, then you can see more clearly how he used Christianity to create the United States. When you look at the creation of the United States, there are 5 phases to the creation. Okay? First, there's discovery, and then there's exploration, and then there's formation, and then there's settlement, then there's colonization and formation, and then there's the creation of the nation. So let's look at those, and I'll just try to give you an example in each one of the stages. If you look at discovery, that's Christopher Columbus and the events that happened around him. But believe it or not, my view of that extends all the way back to Jesus' time and the Apostle Thomas. Because after Jesus passes, Thomas goes to India and establishes 7 churches, Christian churches in India. Now, he doesn't have any way to communicate back. He's not part of a bigger church, whether it be Catholic or pre-Catholic or whatever you want to call it. It's his 7 churches, they're set up, and they kind of run independently. Well, about 1,200 years of that, and the great Khan of India hears about these churches and wants to know more about Christianity. So he turns and he sends messages to the Pope and says, send me priests because we want to learn about Christianity. Well, the Pope sends the priests, but they never get there. And what happens is that story becomes a story of gossip within all the courts of Europe. Now, one of the things that's kind of misunderstood about Columbus is people think, well, he went to the Spanish king and queen, and that's it. And he asked for money, and they didn't give it to him, but then he kept pestering them, and finally they did give it to him. Well, that's not exactly the way it happened. What happened was he does go to the king and queen of Spain, but he also went to every king and queen in Europe begging for money. And eventually, his brother hears the story about the Pope and the priests and stuff like that, and that becomes his driving force. That becomes the motivator for getting the money in order to sail west. He wanted to sail west to get to India to find a route to take Christianity. And it's an amazing thing with this because Christ was actually a very religious man. And the people who play in this story are unbelievable. The priest who gave communion to the Queen of Spain, Christopher Columbus had lunch with that priest, more than lunch, and told him what he was trying to do, and that priest influenced the Queen. Now, the problem for them was they were in the middle of a war with the Moors that had come up from Africa and had taken over most of Europe, all the way to Paris, before they were driven back over 200 years. But they were still in Spain, in Grenada. And there still was a war going on between the Moors and the Spanish. Well, finally, the Spanish take Grenada. And when they do that, the Queen sends a message to Columbus, come. So think about that a minute. Wait a minute now. He goes to her and he wants to go to America. He wants to go west to bring Christianity to India. And meanwhile, there's a war going on between Islam and Christianity in Spain. And the Moors are finally ejected from Spain, and the first thing the Queen does is turn to Columbus and says, "Come here." And they give him the money so he can sail. Now, the reason I say think about that a minute is, over the 300-year period that this country is created, stuff is going to happen all over the world that points back to the United States, not what isn't the United States, but will be the United States. No person, even today with all the computers, could manipulate that. Only God could have done that. Yes. Only God could influence what happens in Spain in order to get, well, that starts in India, that goes to Spain, that gets to Columbus, that gets him over here. You see what I'm saying? God is playing, but that's not the only example of it. It's going to happen over and over and over again. Now, we'll leave Columbus with this. When my wife, who's a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army, and I taught at Fordham University, we didn't know it at the time, and I wasn't even interested in this at the time. But what we found out later was that the actual ship's journal of Christopher Columbus is at Fordham University. The actual journal that he kept. And they translated it, and you could even search this up on Google if you want to. What's very interesting is the first statement in his journal is a proclamation to the king and queen for the reason of the voyage. It's not trade, it's not commerce, it's not conquest. It's evangelism. It's the spread of Christianity. That's all that's mentioned as the purpose for sailing west. So you can see God's hand in there. Now, do they teach that in our public school? Isn't that kind of important why he did it? Maybe it's kind of important as a motivator for what happened. And that's my point. Throughout what you're going to hear, time and time again, there are evidentiary facts of why things happen that aren't taught that should be taught. We go to the second phase, which is exploration. If you look at exploration, where's God in that? Well, I'll tell you where God's in that. The first big explorers of the West were France and Spain. Spain runs up through the Caribbean and up through Florida and across, and France goes north into Nova Scotia, across Canada, and down to Mississippi. The big connection there with God is both those nations send priests, Catholic priests, with their explorers. It's Catholic priests that first come across on the southern end with the Spanish and with the French. And if you look at it on a map, what God's really doing is creating a framework. This is Catholic, 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 down the Mississippi. And in here is a big void. Nobody is looking at this for the first 100 years or so. That's when England and Dutch and Belgium and everybody else comes into the colonies, and that's when we get to settlement. And when you get to settlement, then you start talking about the settlement of the colonies. And that's where you look at that point, the Reformation had happened. And if you see up here, look at, for example, the Mayflower Compact. Now, do you remember in school, we used to look at they used to talk about that all the time. Remember that? They used to talk about the Mayflower Compact all the time. Did you ever see it? Did you actually ever read it? I didn't. But in studying this 300-year period, I studied it. And it reads, in the name of, now let me go two things here. The Mayflower Compact is the very first governing document of the colonies. And it's created, everybody knows about the Pilgrims, but what most people don't know is less than half the people on the ship, this ship, the Mayflower, are Pilgrims. The other half plus are called strangers. They're not in the ship, and they're not coming to America because of their faith. They're coming for other reasons. Well, when the people sit down together, they decide we got to have some rules here. We got to figure out how we're going to govern ourselves, and they write this document. And more than half the signers of this document were strangers, not pilgrims. So it reads, in the name of God, amen, we whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, defender of the faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do these hereby solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together in a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by the virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and covenant for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness thereof, we have hereunder subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the year of the reign of our sovereign Lord King James of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th of Scotland, the 54th Anno Domini 1620. Now, the word in there that's key is covenant. Covenant. And covenant is an agreement amongst men blessed by God. At least that's what I've read. Nobody's countered me yet on it, but it could be. I never went to theology class, but I believe there is an absolute covenant between the United States of America and God. I think it starts here, but I don't think it ends here. I think it starts here. Okay? So if you look at that document, how many times God is mentioned? And Christian. So it's pretty clear what the purpose of creating the colony was. Okay, where are we at here? Okay, then you go to the colonization. After the Mayflower, then people start coming over here. Well, I'm a Catholic. I'm a practicing Catholic. I go every Sunday, except this one. And I'm going to tell you right now, through my study of 5 years of American history during this 300-year period, I will state and debate, anybody who wants to, that the Reformation is the mother of this nation. And the reason I say that is because when the different groups broke off from the mother church, the Catholic Church, and formed their own independent churches in the different nations in Europe, coincidentally and at the same time or just after, there were civil wars within those European nations. And religion always was involved. Not always the prime factor, but always involved. And when there was wars between religions, there was a losing side. And the losing side ended up suffering dramatically. Heads cut off, people put in jail, property taken. And so they left. And they came to America for one purpose, to live their faith. Now it was almost like waves. Like if you stand on the ocean and you watch the waves coming on the beach, it's just like that. Wave after wave come and they settle in places. And because the land was so big, so wide, so unsettled, you could have Puritans in New England, and you could have Presbyterians in the mountains, and you could have Episcopalians in Virginia, and you could have Catholics in Maryland, and nobody ever fought anybody else because there was so much space between everybody. Everybody could be Christian their own way and set up their states. And folks, we've been told there was never any official religions in the states. That's absolutely false. Every state had an official religion, Rhode Island all the way in to the 1900s. So we're told the wrong things. Things were formed because of our faith, not for the other reasons were part of it, but never the center of it and never the unifier. The great unifier of the United States was our language and the Bible. That was the great unifiers. When you get to, so I got Reformation. The other thing that happens in formation of this nation, the first big single national event that affected everybody was the Great Awakening, the revival of the 1740s. Because then George Whitefield comes from England, and he travels the nation, and others join him, and they preach about the personal relationship that we have individually with Jesus Christ, and our value as individuals, that each one of us is equal, each one of us is valuable, and each one of us is a child of God. And we can go directly to Him. I don't have to go to my priest to talk to God. I don't have to go to Pastor Tim to talk to God. I can talk right at Him, and He will talk right back. He might not, because He might be mad at me on that day, but you have that individual thing. Well, think about that now, because that's in 1740. By 1770s, that importance of the individual isn't just religious, but it's spread into politics. That's why we have inalienable rights. And it is inalienable. That's the right word by Thomas Jefferson, not unalienable. It's inalienable, it comes from God. And it's our rights come from God to you, to you, to you, to you, not government. They can't take it away, God gave it to you. And that's what creates the politics of our nation. That's where it all comes from. And there's an institute in Houston, Texas called the American Heritage Education Foundation. And what they're working on is directly relating the Bible to the Constitution. And they have published books that show you verses in the Bible. Then it shows you political thinkers like John Locke. He read the Bible, he read this verse, and he translated it to this politics. And from John Locke, it went to Thomas Jefferson, and there it is in the Constitution. There are people working on this. I mean, all over the country. There's been more than $1 billion spent on bringing Christianity and the reality of Christianity to America. I hope you've been to the Ark, but if you haven't, and you haven't taken your vacation for the summer, go home, pack the bags, and head for the Ark. Because you're going to be amazed at that. When me and my wife walked in that, if you go to a battlefield, or me anyway, if I go to a battlefield like Gettysburg, I feel it. My blood's there, my kin was there, and I feel it. You go to the Ark, you're going to feel it. You're going to see what God did. And you just can't, you walk around like, put your jaw down. But it's built to scale from the Bible, exactly as they did it, you got to see it. Because when you're walking through there, it brings God to you. And if you take grandchildren or somebody who ain't sure about what they're doing, I'm telling you, it's going to change their life. It is going to change their life because you're going to actually feel it and see it. But there's also, the Creation Museum is also up there. There's also a Museum of the Bible in Washington. That's all about $1 billion worth of investment. And when we were there, what was amazing was, why did they put the Ark in Kentucky, and why did they put it right where it is? Because they drew a circle of 1,000 miles and put it on the United States so they could cover 2,000 miles in every direction, 1,000 miles in every direction, and they got like 80% of the people in the United States can drive to it in 2 days. That's why they put it there. And when we went, it was packed. I mean, and I'm telling you, it is worth seeing. And while you're going, go to Billy Graham's library in Charlotte. Anyway, okay. So you go through colonization, you go through the Reformation, and then you get to the creation of the nation. And you get to the Declaration of Independence, and you get to the Revolution, and then the Constitution and the creation of this actual nation. And again, you're going to see God everywhere. Now, every time I say you're going to see God, you see God in people. And the problem I have sometimes with historians, and I'm a historian with a little h, not a big H, but is they always pick on the big people. They always go to the big people, which is okay, but America wasn't created by the big people, and it won't be sustained by the big people. It's going to be sustained by you and me. It's going to be sustained by what we feel here and what we will do and what we won't do. But one of the things we have to do is we have to get people who are other Christians to understand that politics and religion does go together. It was intended to go together. Our founders, and it almost to the man, said, without faith, this fails. No faith, no democracy. And we're the only nation on the planet that has it, and that's because of how it was formed. The foundation of the nation is the Bible. Now, the people don't like me saying this, and they're going to want to talk about Islam and all this other stuff. Folks, no offense, but the history doesn't tell us that. The history tells us that God created this nation for Christians. At the time that this nation was created, over 90% of the people went to church and were Christians. That's a census thing. It's an amazing number. And we're the ones that let it drop. We let it go away. And my own faith, Catholicism in the Northeast, is a joke. How do you have people who will believe and vote for abortion call themselves a Catholic? I won't do it. I will not do it. Okay? So we have to get back to what's real. We have to get back to the Bible and God. And we have to get back to, well, let me tell you about let me give you the last one on the formation part, which is really an interesting story. When they create the government and when they elect George Washington, and so he goes to New York, and he travels to New York, and on the morning that they were going to swear him in, all the bells of the churches in New York rang in the morning. And then they all had services, and then you had the inauguration. At the inauguration, George Washington is sworn in. He's the one that demands a Bible. He is the one who bends over and kisses the Bible, bowing to God. And then he gives his inauguration address. And then every elected person of the federal government goes to church together, one church. Now, the interesting thing about that is that church sits where the Twin Towers are. It's the only building in the Twin Tower complex that did not get damaged or hurt when all that stuff came down. It survived it. And that's where George Washington and the federal government went. And that's why I said at the beginning when I was talking about the Mayflower Compact and the covenant, I believe the covenant was sealed in that church service at the inauguration. Now, I can't prove it. I'm not going to tell you I can prove that. What I can tell you is 2 days before the inauguration, the Congress of the United States, both houses, passed a resolution saying, we are going to have a service as a nation thanking God for this country. That was voted on by the Congress. It exists. The resolution exists. You can find it. So when people they're lying to us. And it's very aggravating for a lot of reasons, but the most aggravating part is we don't have people standing up and saying, you can't say that. You can't say that. You know, the problem with history is it's inconvenient. History happened. You can't change it. You can deny it, you can erase it, but it ain't gonna change it. It happened. And I brought some books I wanted to show you. Our people who don't agree with me, secular humanists, they think that Benjamin Franklin they say he was an atheist, they say he was an agnostic, they say he fooled around with women. Well, he's definitely guilty on the last one, okay? But the rest of it's not true. And I'll tell you how it's not true. A fellow named Fortenberry in Mississippi put together this book. This book is over 300 pages long. He wrote 1 page. Benjamin Franklin wrote the other 300 plus pages. And in this book is his words on Christianity. That's all he talks about. 300 pages. Benjamin Franklin. Now, if you didn't believe in Christianity, you could write a 300-page book against it. But that is not what this book is. This book is a definition, defines Christianity, and repeatedly talks about how important it is to a democracy and to this Constitution. Remember, when they have the Constitutional Convention and they have the final vote on that, and a woman walks up to Benjamin Franklin and says, "What did you give us?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it." You are living that now. You are living it right now. Either we keep it or it's gone, but it's going to be us. Us. and the bigger us of Christianity that will either save our nation or not. And that's the big tie between citizenship and patriotism. That is a joint. It's together. When you break it apart, you kill the country. Now, a lot of people aren't going to like it, but I can't help that. The founders themselves, almost to a man, said, without faith, this doesn't work. Period. And it's proven. Look around the world. How many other countries are like us? So it's a question of either we get our heads together and figure this out, or we're losing it. And that's it. I mean, that's all there is to that. Another book here, and y'all are invited to come up and look at these. There is documents out here that Tim Wooster and the church put together that are like, and it has the bibliography of all the stuff I'm telling you. I have 40 books on this stuff. And some of y'all know the Wall Builders and David Barton and all those guys. I've watched all those tapes. And Dave Barton's right on most everything, and he's a pioneer. He was out ahead of everybody on this stuff. The difference between him and me is A, I'm here, he's not. B, there are parts that I talk about that he doesn't. He tends to focus on the Revolution, the Constitution, the Declaration. I believe the story is much bigger. I believe it goes back to Thomas, and it goes to George Washington's inauguration. So that's the only difference. But he is definitely by far the national expert on this stuff. He's the spokesman of it. He's been before the Supreme Court. So I'm not taking anything away from him. I'm telling you, he's right on. Okay? But if you take a look, they're like this book right here. This book right here goes through every state and every faith and who settled where and why they did it. So this kind of book is what will tell you where the Presbyterians went, where the Catholics went, where the Huguenots went, where the Quakers went. I mean, and they're all like this. Here's a book, the secular humanists love to attacking George Washington, saying he wasn't really a Christian. Well, this book right here is done by a college president, and look how thick that is. That's all a defense of George Washington as a Christian. His documents, his letters, and all the things that he did and why he did them and how he did them. The stuff is out there. We just have to go find it. We have to go talk about it. We have to get it to people. It's really important. This is not like, oh, we had history today and that was pretty nice and okay. Look around, folks. Joe Biden won. He didn't win with my vote. And I'm not talking about the policies. I'm talking about where they're coming from. I'm talking about where God fits in what they're doing and where Christianity fits. And finally, the court's starting to swing around, but we've got to keep this going. This is the other book I want. This is the book that started me off. Me and my wife were watching the television back like 2010 or 2011, something like that. And this came up on the TV, and I said to my wife, I really would like to see that book. And she bought it for me, And this book is over 1,000 pages. It was done by a minister, a Yankee minister, during the Civil War, who believed he was living in the end times. It actually says in the foreword, I'm living in the end times. And it goes through all the documents, all letters, speeches about the formation of our nation. And the title of it is The Christian Life and Character of the Civil Institutions of the United States. This is something you should have. If you don't get anything else, because these are all the real words, the real documents, state constitutions. They're all right in here. And they can't, so I'm about fixed. I really appreciate your patience with me. I really appreciate being invited. I'm asking you to think about this. I would never challenge a pastor and his people as far as what the priorities should be. But I'm asking you to deeply consider what's going on and what the solution is. The solution to me is not the computer. The solution is not some government program. The solution is what we were founded on, which is the Bible and God and Jesus. And the solution is we have to get that back. If you were to look in that book, you'd be stunned. You'd absolutely, I could teach 2 semesters on this stuff, folks. That's how much there is of it. That's how many people are involved in it from time over 300 years. I really thank you for your time. I appreciate being here with you, and God bless you.